Hi, I'm Parneet Jaggi, and this is the fifth lecture in the series of lectures on T.S.Eliot's The Wasteland. And in this lecture, we're going to be briefly looking into the third section of the poem, The Fire Sermon. Now, as the title indicates, the Fire Sermon is all about the world is on fire, burning with the fire of hatred, fire of infatuation, birth, old age, death, sorrow, lamentation, misery, and despair. All these are on fire. And this title of the section has been borrowed from the sermon of Lord Buddha, wherein he says that the world is on fire and that lust burns up fire. So while we look into this section, this seems to be the longest section of the Wasteland. And basically it deals with a turn away from the earthly do's. It deals with a series of increasingly sexual encounters and concludes with a river song and a religious incantation. Now here again I will be taking selected lines from the text just to give you an idea of what are the thematic concerns of this section. Now in the very first lines, the section opens with a desolate riverside scene. The river's tent is broken, the last fingers of leaf clutch and sink into the wet bank. The wind crosses the brown land unheard. The nymphs are departed. Sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. The river bears no empty bottles, sandwich papers, silk handkerchiefs, cardboard boxes, cigarette ends, or other testimony of summer nights. The nymphs are departed. Now, this scene is being described on the river Thames in the autumn season. The river looks deserted, and there are only vestiges of the summer parties in which the rich businessmen and their sons have held picnics on the river and left the polluted surrounding badly littered. So here the pollution of the river stands for the spiritual degeneration of the modern man once again. So here you can hear the merry sounds of the London crowds, but the river bears just empty bottles and these leftover things from the crowd. Now then, when we look at the next lines, he talks about the different kinds of episodes of the rapes and the crimes that have been happening on the banks of this river. So he says along with oil and tar, there is also a lot of crime on the bank of this river Thames. He says this was the same bank in the past where Elizabeth and her friends and lovers used to have pleasure excursions. But now the daughters of Thames are giving stories of their seductions. So there are three stories that he's narrating. The first is from a girl from Richmond, the second from Moorgate Sands, and the third from Margate Sands. Now each one of this girl is telling the story of her rape. Now, such people, such vulnerable girls actually have nothing to complain because it's a common occurrence on this river and in the society that we see today. So what he wants to say here is that lust and rape are responsible for the decay of our modern society, and this kind of degeneration prevails in all classes of our society. Now, after describing the scene on the river, he also mentions the example of a lady called Mrs. Porter, who is waiting for Sweeney, her lover. And this lady, Mrs. Porter, and her daughter are fake and falsified characters who are living they wash their feet in soda water in place of natural water, and who are living a very superficial kind of a life just to show off. Then in the next lines, there is a description of the vulgarization of industry and commerce in cities like London. Now, a very important part of this section, now we're coming to these lines, is about the mechanical routine of a typist girl. Now, this typist girl is a representative of any working girl who goes to the office, works from morning to evening, and has a set mechanical routine which is completely devoid of any emotions or satisfaction. Let's look into these lines. At the violet hour, when the eyes and back turn upward from the desk, when the human engine waits like a taxi throbbing waiting, I, tiresias though blind, throbbing between two lives. Now, these lines actually are signature lines of this poem. This symbol, this simile, like a taxi throbbing waiting, is the most quoted simile of Eliot and also of the Wasteland. Now here Tiresias is an observer, he is a spectator. Now we know Tiresias is a mythical figure from classical mythology who has the features of both male and female and is blind but is prophetic, he can see into the future. Now he is observing a young typist girl who at the violet hour in the evening, when her eyes and her back turn upward from the desk, when she has finished her desk job and when she's about to leave for her home, she is compared to a human engine, a taxi. She is like a human taxi who is throbbing, her heart is throbbing, and she is waiting. She's waiting for something to happen. She is waiting to go home, waiting for her lover to appear. After he appears, she is waiting for him to leave. So she is like a mechanical taxi, throbbing and waiting. And Tiresias, he says, I, Tiresias, though blind, throbbing between two lives, old man with wrinkled female breast, can see at the violet hour, the evening hour, that strive homeward and brings the sailor home from sea. The typist whom at tea time clears her breakfast, lights her stove and lays out food in tins. She follows her extremely mechanical routine, dull routine, as usual every day. So he watches the whole thing, the whole suffering in a very detached manner. So she goes home, she does her breakfast, she clears her beds and her clothes, and then she waits for her lovers. The lover arrives. They have no spiritual bonding, emotional bonding between them, and then she says, oh, she's glad that it's all over. So then she is all alone, she walks alone in the room, she smoothens her hair, and then she mechanically puts on a record on the gramophone. So this is how life in the modern society moves on. Then in this section, Eliot is also pointing towards the song of the river Thames, the story of a brief mention of Queen Elizabeth, then again the exploitation of the girls in the low society, and eventually he concludes this section with St. Augustine's Confessions, where he refers to his visit to Carthage, and he says the city is burning with lust. Saint Augustine prayed to God to save him from the fire of lust, and in this grace God saved him. So therefore, to conclude, I will just sum up what all we have seen in this section. The Fire Sermon also has a brief interlude which begins with the river song in earnest. First, a fisherman's bar is described, then a beautiful church interior, then the river Thames itself. There are among the few moments of tranquility in the poem, and they seem to represent some sort of similar or simpler alternative. The Thames daughters, the daughters of the Thames, borrowed from Spenser's poem, chime in a nonsense chorus. Vi la la, vi la la. There is a song which is appearing time and again. The scene shifts again to Queen Elizabeth I in an amorous encounter with the Earl of Leicester, with whom she is friendly, and they move around in and even boat in the river as a picnic. The Queen seems unmoved by her lover's declarations, and she thinks only of her people, humble people who expect nothing. The section then comes to an abrupt end with a few lines from St. Augustine's Confessions and a vague reference to the Buddha's fire sermon, burning. So this was my interpretation of the third section of the Wasteland, the fire sermon. We'll continue with the fourth section in the next lecture in this series. Thank you for now.